Redditors who metal detect, what has been your coolest discovery? A few years ago, a guy on Reddit asked Reddit if anyone had a metal detector he could borrow to find his wife's lost wedding ring. I lived local to him at the time and had one I never really used. I offered help, showed up at the dude's house, and we ended up finding the ring in about 10 minutes. That was the first and last time I ever used that metal detector. You Joe Lithium, if you're still out there, I hope you're doing well, and your wife hasn't lost her ring again. Still around. Still owe you one, brother. My wedding ring. 1. In the garden, under some tomato starts. 2. In the garden, mixed in with carrot seeds. 3. In my friend's backyard, near the hammock I drunkenly fell off of. 4. In a massive leaf pile, 6 foot tall by easily 12 foot in diameter, at another friend's house. I need to get this thing resized. That's a good idea. If the metal detector was pocket sized, you could keep it with you and find your ring just as soon as you lose it. This happened to my best friend. She lost her ring the day after she was proposed to at the beach in Los Angeles. She was crying and asked the lifeguard tower if there was anything they could do. They gave her a number to this metal detector guy named Harry. They said he was the best in town and not to call anyone else. So they give him a ring and he's there 20 minutes later with his metal detector. Old tan dude with long beach hair. Took him 5 minutes to find the ring. She offered to give him $200 cash. He said no thank you. Their happiness was enough for him. They gave him a ring to get a ring. Poetic. The year was 1996. I was 22 and just bought my first metal detector. I was at my girlfriend's house and asked her mom if I could use it in the backyard. She says sure and then starts telling me about a precious ring her oldest daughter had lost in the backyard in 1979. It was a family heirloom and was missed very greatly. She pulls out home movies that were made the day it was lost. It was at a family reunion. Well, I saw in the movie where the girl was mostly hanging out. I walked outside, turned on my detector and found the ring that had been lost for 17 years in about 2 minutes. Talk about brownie points. I bought my son a kid size one for his 6th birthday. I'm the one that uses it though. I feel pretty ridiculous walking around with it, but I just can't help myself. My family can be little turds when I get it out and constantly throw coins in the sand when detecting on a beach just to see me get excited. It's kinda scary how many rusty nails and razor blades I find on beaches. I've found a few rings but pretty sure they're just costume jewelry. Lots of coins too, but mostly rusty nails. So many rusty nails. For me it's bottle caps. I hate bottle caps. My father-in-law's gold wedding ring that he had lost almost 15 years before. I had detected the crap out of the area that he told he had lost it in. Found literally dozens and dozens of pieces of junk over hours and hours of detecting and digging. Digging in clay. Sometimes digging deep. Every hit I get I pull something out. So my machine is working despite me being a rank noob. In the end, I don't find it. So of course I get the disappointed look and comments about my machine not working very well, with the obvious implication in the air that I failed. Now, I'm kinda peed at myself and frustrated already. So yeah, I feel like crap about it. A year or two go by and I decide to detect the garden area to kill some time and dong around with my detector on a nice fall day. The garden area is well over 200 feet away from the spot he had pointed to initially. Their acreage is just under 8 acres, so I wasn't really looking for the ring. But you never know, eh? So instead of doing a grid like you would when you seriously want to cover every inch of ground, because the garden is about 200 feet by about 50 feet and I was just messing around, I just let my intuition lead me in a meandering route. I find a couple of pieces of junk and then I pull a gold looking ring out of the ground. This is about 10 minutes into detecting. I call my wife over and ask her if it's her dad's ring. Frankly, it looked thinner and smaller than I expected. She calls her mom over and her mom almost starts crying. They call him over and he almost starts crying. That day I was the hero. Very cool. For me anyways. That's how you get addicted to metal detecting. That practically upgrades you from son-in-law to son. My dog once ate one of my mother's sapphire earrings. My dad went out with the dog every morning and used my metal detector to find it. That is way more brilliant than digging through every single poop made. My keys, which was the whole reason for buying the detector. MFW, buying a metal detector is actually cheaper than getting a replacement key fob for my car. When we were in high school, my buddy and I were metal detecting around his dad's yard. Found a door to a small fallout shelter that the original owners of the house had built out of paranoia. Still stocked with several weeks worth of canned food, tools, medical supplies, and a radio. A pre-Revolutionary War graveyard in my backyard in Connecticut. Got a metal detector to locate nails in some 250-year-old chestnut flooring I was refinishing in an old colonial I bought. Took my 5-year-old son out to the backyard to play with it. Found out I had 6 people buried in the back corner of my yard. Lead-lined wooden caskets show up really well. State came in, made all kinds of nasty noises about things and then just sort of disappeared. Turned out they were the original settlers in my town and no one knew what to do about the graves, so we all just pretended like they weren't there. I found a cannonball fragment from the War of 1812 on a Lake Erie beach. The remains of my neighbor's dad's pocket watch, dropped in the yard 50 years ago. Beyond repair certainly, but recognizable and somewhat satisfying to my neighbor, I hope. Mostly I find old farmyard rubbish because of where we live, but I'm happy to get that out of the ground too. Old leaf springs and axles, an axe head, a jalopy type hood. Sometimes the hit coincides with the old midden pile, where you'll find bottles and crockery and china as well. Found a 1915 barber quarter at the in-laws, too. My friend Dean found a bicycle buried under the sand at a beach. An entire bicycle. It needed cleaning, and a new tire, along with a new chain, but after that it was as good as new. I like to think some butthole friends dug a hole and buried it. Tide came in and out and made the dig site impossible to identify, and despite their efforts they never found exactly where it was buried. Not sure if this is the kind of answer you're looking for, but I work as an MRI tech aide and I run a handheld metal detector over patients before I bring them into the scanner room. For those who may not know, MRI scanners have an extremely strong magnetic field. It's so strong that bringing something into the scanner room which isn't MRI safe, like a metal chair, gurney, or oxygen tank, would literally make that object go flying through the air and into the scanner. It's very dangerous and we constantly have to check that people aren't bringing anything inside the scanner room with them that isn't MRI safe. Anyways, we had a young kid come in who was about 9 years old for a brain scan. I'm getting him ready for his MRI and talking with him, trying to keep him calm. Kids his age sometimes freak out when they see the scanner. I ask him if he has anything in his pockets and he says he doesn't, takes out some change and a pen. I then run a metal detector over his pockets to reaffirm that they're empty, and the metal detector whizzes and beeps in one of his cargo pockets. He looks at me with a wide-eyed stare, as if he is about to be in trouble. I ask him what's in there and he starts tearing up and looks over at his mom. I'm confused and also glance at his mom as she stares back at myself and her son with the same look of confusion. His mom sternly asks her son, "What's in your pocket?" The poor kid is standing there crying with his arms and legs spread as if I'm about to search him before handcuffing him and hauling him off to kiddie jail. He replies to his mom, "I'm sorry, it's not mine." I put my hand in his pocket and proceed to pull out a 5-inch spring-loaded knife and a lighter. The kid's mom loses it and starts lecturing him in a pretty loud and powerful manner. Apparently, this kid had been hanging around with some bad kids in the neighborhood and his mom instantly knew that the knife and lighter came from one of those boys he shouldn't have been running around with. She told him to stop crying and to get your butt inside that scanner right now. We ended up proceeding with his MRI and we're kinda laughing about it with his mom while he was inside the scanner. Poor little guy still had tears running down his face when we finished about 30 minutes later, lol. He was a good kid, you could tell. He really was upset that he made his mom angry. Sister is a biomed and says that just walking past the MRI room tugs at her hair clip. The most interesting thing I've found while using a metal detector on a beach was a steel horseshoe. It made me feel lucky. My parents' acreage was on land that used to contain stables in the 1900s. Horseshoes everywhere. The neat thing is the stables were for draft horses, so they were huge horseshoes. My grandparents moved to Maine almost 25 years ago from Kansas City, MO, where my grandfather was a policeman with KCPD. They metal detect on the beaches near their house in Maine almost every week, and 4 years ago they found buried in the sand a ring. It was a police department ring from my grandfather's division. It was engraved with the officer's last name and belonged to one of his friends from the force, a man he hadn't spoken to in 20 years. My grandmother had his wife's phone number, so they called to tell them they'd found his ring. It turned out their family had gone on vacation in Georgia almost 15 years before, 5 years after my grandparents moved to Maine, and he had lost the ring while at the beach, and it turned up on a beach in Maine close to the one person in the whole state who knew him. They've also found other rings, including a few high school class rings they've returned to their owners, but all of those came from Maine or its neighboring states. A set of World War I medals, the ones that were given out after the war, belonging to RLT Rupert Frampton. Can't find anything about him on the Googles. I keep them in the box with the 2 sets I have from my great-grandfather and step-great-grandfather. My husband metal detects. I've gone along occasionally as well because who doesn't like a good treasure hunt? Best thing that he's found is a taxi driver's pin from New York City with the driver's name, number and such on it from the 1920s or 1930s. It's nothing of real value but is in surprisingly good condition for being in dirt for as long as it was. My best metal detector story comes from my deployment to Iraq. We had a lot of metal detectors with us to find buried weapons caches and such, but the Iraqi soldiers that we worked with weren't quite clear on how they worked. Every time we found something in a field it was some sort of unexploded ordnance, so the Iraqis thought that they were bomb detectors and not metal detectors. We were doing a foot patrol with the Iraqi army through a small village. They were looking for illegal weapons and such. The soldiers were manning the metal detectors and every time one beeped they all yelled, "Bomb, bomb," except they were waving the detectors over cars, metal cars. They thought there were explosives in the cars. Found a full 6-pack of beer in a guy's pockets. I was working security at a country music festival. They gave us handheld ones to check suspicious lumps. Amateur hour over there. Everyone knows it's liquor in a plastic flask or bottle if you want to go a smuggling. I know a man who grew up in Normandy in France right after World War II. As you can imagine, there were a lot of unexploded bombs left. So one day, he was around 8 years old. He and some friends go metal detecting and found one. They took it home and played a bit with it. As you can imagine, BOOM. He still has pieces of this bomb in his chest nowadays, and I think there were some lost fingers too. Don't play with bombs, kids. And fireworks too. They are still, to this day, scouring the beach for ordnance and other artifacts from World War II. It's incredible. At the beach, my brother and I found a monogrammed sterling sliver money clip stuffed with $20 and $5 100s. Fortunately, it was buried in the sand far enough away from the ocean that the paper bills were still intact. We looked around, but the area where we discovered it was deserted. This comment makes me want to stop doing all activities besides beachcombing, not just because of the monetary value of what you found. I've found a full money clip too, but it was in a parking lot and not underground. But, the adventure, the joy of the find, wishing. I went metal detecting with my dad on an isolated island he used to play on as a kid 50 years ago. We found a hatchet head about 18 inches down that he lost as kid building a fort. Maybe not the coolest find for anyone else, but it was awesome to see my elderly father instantly transported to his childhood. I found a class ring with year and initials. This was before internet, so I went to the local high school and got the old yearbook. 3 names matched the initials. Looked them up in the phone book for the owner and was able to return it 7 years after she lost it. I found something that made a dude's day. Unlike most of you, my metal detector is used to check you into the emergency room. One time, this fellow kept making the detector go off near his abdomen. I wasn't satisfied, so I used our handheld metal detector wand. Turns out his pocket knife had fallen into a hole in his pocket into the inside of his jacket. He thanked me and explained his grandfather had given him the knife when he was a boy, and he was coming to see his grandpa in the air. Or he was secretly trying to stab his grandfather, and you foiled his plot. My husband had to rent a metal detector when he lost his wedding band in the backyard. He was stacking logs and took off his gloves for something and it must have been flung out during that. Good news is that he found it almost right away in a pile of leaves. I rented a metal detector for a very similar situation. I didn't find my ring with the metal detector, but when I went to put my gloves on a day later I found the ring inside. My dad rented a metal detector because he lost his wedding ring doing yard work. He went over everything and finally moved to the compost pile in the back. Around that time, I got home from school or something and I see him with this weird contraption. I ask him what he was doing and he said he lost his wedding ring and was trying to find it. At that point I see something shiny and ask, is that it? It was. Anyway, I got to play with the metal detector the rest of the afternoon and found 2 really old, rusty Matchbox cars and an old Budweiser can. I still have the cars. I once found a stash of quarters hidden in a small wooded area as a kid with my buddies. It was about $20 worth. We took them and bought pizza and 2 liters at the Domino's on the corner. My girlfriend and I found a ring once on a children's playground area. It turned out to just be sterling silver, so nothing expensive. Never did find the owner, but I like to think some kid got dumped and threw their ring away. I found a girls' class ring one time while scuba diving at a local lake. Ended up taking it back to the school and they located the girl who had lost it, so I thought that was pretty cool. Turns out it was karma, because not long after I lost my wedding ring in the ocean someone found it and returned it to me in less than a month. Coolest thing I found was a silver button weighing 2.1 gram from 1780s or so. The history behind it is amazing. But let me tell you something, my dad metal detects too and because of schoolwork I couldn't go with him for the day. The sucker found a golden coin who was otherwise unknown. It is a coin so rare that it's strange. Coin is from around 1560. If you know Dutch history you know that the 80-year war against the Spanish the coin was taxed with some kind of staple. This staple was also never used before. He sold it and got enough money to pay for my tuition. It's a lovely hobby, but don't expect to be as lucky as him. It takes time to plan and information. Countless times we look at things like strange, this hill seems out of place, and then we spend the next 3 days searching it. The RNG gods were on his side that day. My uncle is a notorious idiot. We had a cabin by a stream, and he decided to buy a metal detector and see if he could find some gold. He picks up some rocks and scans over them. The detector goes off and he gets super excited. He does the same with multiple rocks, and now has a pile, assuming the rocks must have deposits. He'd been at it for an hour or 2 before he realized that he was holding the rocks with his left hand and scanning with his right. He was detecting the gold wedding band on his finger. Sounds like a parable in the making. My wife would most definitely say her wedding ring. While we were dating, metal detecting was our hobby that we did together. Long story short, I made a heart-shaped plug, cut out piece of grass, and put a ring in it. Then I made her come dig it up. She loved it and we've been happily married for 2 years now. Smooth. I'm a land surveyor. We use a metal detector to find metal pins set as property corners and nails we bury in the ground as control, traverse points, to occupy with a total station, GPS unit or what have you. The detector we use only responds to iron, but we still find some cool stuff sometimes. I've found animal traps, knives, a couple of axe heads, old refuse pits from long gone home sites that led to some nice antique glass, etc. But my favorite find so far was a 4-pound meat cleaver buried right in the middle of a local town, at the corner of some guy's backyard. That's probably a murder weapon. You've been spotted by the doggo of studying. Like this video for good grades for the next 2 years. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.